This is TLV1.
The Tel Aviv Review with Gilad Halpern.
Hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review, a program dedicated to the word, to the thought and to debate, brought to you by the Leer Institute, which promotes humanistic, democratic and liberal values in the social discourse in Israel. I'm your host Gilad Halpern, and every week I'll be engaging in close encounters of the intellectual kind with writers and scholars, or simply people of all types and vocations who have done something to make our lives a tad more interesting. My guest today is a lecturer in Arabic language and literature at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev and in Arab film at the Open University of Israel. She is also the coordinator of a research group at the Leer Institute that's dedicated to the study of Arabic narratives of migration and journey. The group will hold a public meeting in Nazareth this coming Friday. Dr. Ariel Sheetrit, hello and welcome to the Tel Aviv Review.
Hello, thank you for hosting me.
So your study, the group study, looks at rihla, and that's literally a journey in Arabic, which is also a genre in and of itself in Arabic literature that focuses on east-west encounters, that is, of an Arab protagonist traveling to the west. What is it about rihla literature that made it so appealing to Arab readers?
The rihla is, first of all, it's very basic in Arabic literature, in the beginnings of modern Arabic literature in the 19th century. The first thing I think that makes it appealing is that you get to see other places. You get to stay at home and sit on your chair, and just by reading, you get introduced to worlds that you otherwise wouldn't see and wouldn't get to. So especially in the 19th century when travel was much more difficult and only very small groups of people would travel outside of Egypt, Lebanon, Syria. Those are the areas that we're talking about, the Levant. Reading about other people's travels was eye-opening.
Mm-hmm. But that's also something you can say about travel literature and travelogues in the West, in Europe, that existed there as well. Can you detect any differences or specificities for rihla literature in the Arabic culture per se?
So in the 19th century, this was one of the genres that got people thinking and also got people writing. The rihla basically started as people who traveled to the east. We're not talking about vast amount of people. We're talking about actually very few people, all men, who would travel from somewhere in the east and would record not just their travels, but what they thought about their travels. And specifically you're asking, why is it different here? These texts tended to treat issues that were very prominent, at least among the intellectuals in the 19th century, which, to put it in a word, is issues of modernity and change.
Mm-hmm. So what really are the main themes in the rihla literature that the Arab travelers chose to focus on?
Okay. I'll put it like this. I think it's important to first say that this genre of basically travelogues didn't start in the 19th century. In the 19th century, it kind of takes a whole new place within Arab culture and Arab writing. But it started... Because
this is when they start engaging with modernity?
Yes, yes, exactly.
Okay, we'll get to that in a second.
It has a different flavor to it. But I will say briefly, because I don't want to focus on it here, there is a whole history of Arab travel writing starting in the 10th century and continuing with some of the highlights are Ibn Jubayr from Andalusia in the 12th century, and the most popular, Ibn Battuta from the 4th century, who was from Morocco and traveled for about 30 years. And then a whole bunch of other less well-known travelers and writers throughout those centuries. And we do have to keep those in mind because especially Ibn Battuta, intellectuals generally tended to know about these writings and be influenced by them. And the genre, the idea of a rihla as a journey that is kind of transformed into rihla as a genre, happened before the 19th century. Then the 19th century comes along, and we're basically talking about Napoleon's invasion in 1798. as the big turning point, the big encounter. I mean, this is up for debate exactly in what way this was an encounter between East and West, but this is a major turning point. This is basically one of the major beginnings of colonialism, which is, I mean, when we talk about encounter, this isn't generally a friendly encounter. Mm-hmm. And maybe the point I want to make here is you say, what makes it so interesting, this travel genre? And the issue here is the encounter between East and West and all the tensions involved with it, modernity and all that it included, all the differences between the West and technological advances, the things that were coveted in the East and actually were the reason that many of the people in the 19th century traveled in the first place.
Mm-hmm. And was the view of modernity favorable, complex? What can you tell us about that?
Okay, so this is a huge subject of debate all across the 19th century. I want to kind of focus it onto how it plays out in the rihla itself, and not the debates, because that's a whole other topic. But if we look at Rafi Tahtawi, who traveled from Egypt to Paris, he traveled for 5 years. He went in 1826 and came back in 1831, and he was actually the imam of a small group of Egyptian students who were sent to Paris to study things like engineering and languages and other things that basically would bring them forward technologically. He was the imam, and he wrote a very well-known book about Paris, Takhlis el-Ibriz, fi Talkhis Bariz, which is basically, he calls it's a very flowery title. Basically the summary of the treasure, or the purification of the treasure in the summary of Paris. It's a rhyme which recalls actually pre-modern literature, and actually is one of the things which shows us that the pre-modern rihla writing is one of the things which is alive and well in modern rihla writing. Right. It takes a while to kind of separate from the pre-modern rhyming and all sorts of other ways of writing.
So he goes to Paris in the 1820s and comes back with what insights?
Okay. He basically describes life in France, but from a very distant perspective. He talks about politics. He talks about women, a lot about women. This is something which is always, this is kind of like the crux of the issue. The East-West encounter metaphorically is rendered through women in the novels then that come to be written. And the issue of, to what extent do we want to be like Europe and adopt their lifestyle is often played out. It certainly is played out in the novels through women, and women are a topic of immense fascination. But he writes about mostly from a kind of a cold perspective, like he's sitting and observing French society, and comes back and writes about it. Takes people into France and basically how society works from a pretty technical perspective. But this was an important turning point. That's the major point about this book. It came out in the beginning of the 1930s and was actually very popular among people who read, and quite influential.
Mm-hmm. Did they view it as a model to look up to, or as some sort of Western decadence, as many people in the Arab world look at Europe today, or somewhere in between?
Everything. I mean, this was just a huge issue of contention. How much to adapt? Do we take technological advances and reject more kind of lifestyle issues? Must we also take the lifestyle issues, kind of more freedom of expression, or freer relationships with women, in order to really be able to carry out the technological advances and scientific advances? Issues of religion and spirituality were really prominent in the writings that followed. Particularly, I mean, if we can jump then across the 19th century, there were a handful of writers who, like Tahtawi, discuss their travels to Europe. Right. And then starting in the 20th century, we come to this really fantastic mix, this transformation of, okay, if we can say the beginning of the transformation is an actual travel into a travel log, so actual travels become written down so that the rihla becomes a genre, then the rihla turns into something that begins to meld fact and fiction together, usually kind of a novel, often based on actual travels of the author, that continue to deal with the same issues, but in a much less kind of a list form and more of a romantic, almost always romantic. It's almost always about a man going to the West. There's always a woman who pretty much represents the West, who tends generally to cause him to go through serious emotional, both opening up his mind and all of his thinking, usually leading to some sort of crisis, where the question then is...
This is all metaphorical, of course, because it's not the person himself, but the civilization that he represents.
Yes. And we're talking, just to bring the actual examples, one of the main such works was Bird of the East. That's how it was translated into English, and it does exist in English. You can read it, by Tawfiq al-Hakim, and that was in 1938. Mm-hmm. And also Qandil Hashim by Yahya Haqi is one of the major works, which is translated as The Lamp of Hashim. It's kind of a long short story or a short novel. Mm-hmm. And both of these works are about a man who goes to Europe. And in Bird of the East by Tawfiq al-Hakim, the protagonist goes to Europe and the reader basically travels with him and goes through all of the ups and downs of his discovery of another culture, the excitement, basically the huge crisis that he undergoes when he realizes that the woman he is involved with just basically drops him. All the while having these discussions with a Russian man as another character about spirituality, which is kind of the main question throughout the book, where the question is, how much can you be in the West and adopt all these sorts of important ideas and also have a spiritual life? Qandil Hashim, the second work that I mentioned, actually starts with the return of the main character to Egypt. And we basically, he says, I was in Europe for 7 years, and he jumps right back, and the reader actually doesn't travel along with him. But the entire work is about the ramifications of his return, and how then can somebody who has been to Europe, and this particular character becomes a doctor, he becomes an eye doctor, which is such an important role, something so needed in Egyptian society. This was in the 1940s when the novella was written. And this major clash between that he actually cures people on the one hand, and the superstitions of the people he is curing, who basically believe that the medicines don't do anything, but superstition is the way to be cured, and how he kind of mediates between the people in order for him to accept them and them to accept him. He comes back completely transformed.
A parallel that really jumps to mind, reading and listening to what you're just saying, is Orientalism, Edward Said's Orientalism. In many ways, what you're describing here is a mirror image of Orientalism, because, Said's contention at the end of the day was that the depiction of the East by Western writers was more a figment of their imagination than an actual portrayal of reality.
Yes.
Is it also the same in the kind of works that you deal? The West is more of an imaginary idea than what it actually is?
Well, first of all, this has also been called Occidentalism. So absolutely this mirror image expressed in the terminology. And one of the most interesting aspects, if we turn it into a mirror image, I mean, it's simplifying here, so let's beware, but it's very relevant, is the idea that if Said was basically talking about the romanticization of women in the East for the male travelers and the women representing the East, it is very interesting that the women for the Arab travelers also represented the West, which is kind of ironic, since the West basically represents technological advances and all sorts of scientific ideas, basically becomes a metaphor through female character. This is really quite fascinating. I guess what I'm trying to say is it doesn't quite work. And in some ways it also shows, both with Said and the idea of Orientalism and Occidentalism, what happens when you simplify this discussion of the self and the other, that in both cases it's about stereotypes and about kind of opening yourself up to the world. as an individual and then as a society.
So fast forward to Israel in the 21st century and to your research group at Leer Institute. One of the really unique and very curious things about it is that it is run in Arabic. But when you do that, you basically push away in many ways the vast majority of people in this country who don't speak Arabic. Can you tell us a bit about the difficulties of running a research group in Arabic headed by, at the end of the day, an Israeli Jew?
Interestingly, we're in the beginning of the second year of activity. When we began, it actually took place in Hebrew. So we actually underwent a transformation. What I had wanted for the group, my vision was for it to take place in Arabic. And kind of because of the issue that you raised, the majority here is Hebrew speakers. I didn't want to have to turn people away. It's not really exactly like people were banging down our doors to come participate. It's about Arabic literature, and we wanted people who were interested in Arabic literature to come. The people who have come are from quite a range within Arabic literature, both writers, researchers, high school teachers. This was kind of the range of people coming, and Jews and Arabs alike. And we got to this point. We had one person who was coming who didn't know Arabic, and she couldn't come one day. And the people who also had a similar vision to me, Yoni Mendel and others, basically said, why isn't it happening in Arabic? And on that day, I sort of thought, well, is it even possible? Can we do this? And I asked the members of the group, can we maybe move into Arabic today, try to hold some of the discussion in Arabic, and we see what happens. And from that actual moment...
What's the proportion of Jewish and Arab members?
Well, every time, we have a core group, but every time, of course, someone new comes, someone is sick and can't come, and the proportion still, despite that, always seems to be about half and half, which is amazing in and of itself. And at that moment, we switched over into Arabic and basically never went back to Hebrew. And that was it. It was really quite amazing that was what everyone who was there wanted, and that everyone with their native Arabic, with their learned Arabic, some of the Jews who come are from Arab countries and are also native speakers of Arabic, everyone with all their different kind of levels of Arabic, but everybody with a high level, just started speaking in Arabic about the texts.
Do you feel it was empowering for the Palestinian scholars participating? Because for the first time they can actually, or maybe it's not very often that they can engage in serious scholarly work in their native tongue in this country.
Okay, in the country they do. There are more than a handful of places where there are research groups, even like this one, that take place in Arabic. But they're all from Arab universities or in Arab libraries, in Arab villages and cities. And the idea that this is happening within a Jewish institution with a clear majority of Hebrew speakers, and where that's the language spoken, that and English in most Van Leer meetings, that's kind of the big change here. The idea that these people can come, and whenever there's, let's say, even a single Jew in the room, it means that all of the Arabic speakers, because Palestinian Israelis almost always speak Hebrew, everyone has to move into Hebrew. So the idea that they get the upper hand language-wise, that's the new thing in this group.
So you're really making history here, in many ways.
Exciting to think of it that way. It feels that way. The dynamic in the room is not a dynamic that I usually come across in Israel. Okay,
so our listeners can absolutely come and observe for themselves this coming Friday in Nazareth. For more details, you can go to the Leer Institute website. In the meantime, thank you very much, Dr. Ariel Sheetrit, lecturer in Arabic language and literature at Ben-Gurion University of the Negev, and lecturer in Arab film at the Open University. Thank you very much for coming in today and talking to us about Rihla.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
That brings us to the end of our show today. Thank you very much for listening. Also, big thanks to Alex Benish, the technical producer of this show. I'm Gilad Halpern, signing off here in Tel Aviv. Do join us again next week for another edition of the Tel Aviv Review. And until then, goodbye.
Inside the matter, it's already there. And I've got this. I just have to scope my way around it. Though sometimes it's veiled and mistaken. gone.